Today on the CEO Barbecue, we're looking for copper in the south of British Columbia together with Vizsla Copper. If you want a bullet point summary of this conversation and all the other CEO barbecues in your inbox once a week, go to researchtalks.com and subscribe to our free newsletter. Now, the company you're about to hear from has paid us for the production of this video, which means that this is not research, it's an advertisement, and you should treat it as such. Research is conducted by reading the company's official filings, which you can find on setterplus.ca. And please only watch this if you absolutely know what you're doing. This interview is intended only for experienced junior mining speculators because mineral exploration, development, and mining is a very tough business where failure is the norm and should be the expectation. This is going to be a conversation that is general and impersonal in nature, containing forward-looking statements. I am not a licensed financial advisor, and my business sells content-producing services, which also makes me biased in multiple ways. So before continuing on, please talk to an independent investment advisor with a good long-term track record because your capital might be at risk. If you're not 100% sure you understand 100% of the disclaimers I just showed you, please go to the last section of this video and do not consume this content unless you fully understand and agree with everything said therein. That all said, Vizsla is listed as VCU on the TSX Ventures Exchange, where over the last 3 months, the average volume has been about 650,000 shares. With a market cap of just under $48 million and 342 million shares outstanding. Today, this is a 14.5 cent stock with a 52-week high of 16 cents and a 52-week low of 5 cents. 50-day moving average is at 11.2 cents here, and the 200-day moving average is at 7.8 cents, which means the stock is now trading above both of them and getting some momentum. No fancy long intro needed here for Vizsla, though, since Craig's been on the channel many times over the last year. So for those of you who might want to see those videos from before, there's going to be a playlist containing all of them, and it's going to be linked in the description of this video. Time for me to shut up already, though, and Craig, let you do the talking. But first of all, thank you so much for being here today.
Very, very, always a pleasure, Antonio.
The pleasure's all mine, and I really am looking forward to an update. You've had a couple of news releases since we last spoke, which was actually at the beginning of this year, so quite a 6 months or something like that. It was right after your acquisition of the Rand claims. So briefly, since then, what have you done for shareholders?
Well, we've done a lot of drilling. We acquired that the Poplar project back in early last year, March last year. We got on the ground and we were a bit astonished with what we saw. There's a big deposit there that we already own that was drilled out, discovered in the 70s by Utah Copper and drilled out by Utah Copper. No other real exploration work on this entire property to speak of, other than a few RC holes. But there was enough there to sort of suggest that there's something going on there. Because we're in a big terrain, big field there, big porphyry copper field. You've got Huckleberry Mine to the south. You've got Surge Copper's Utsa and then Bergenberget just to the south of us. A couple of other discoveries like Stars nearby. This is a proven porphyry copper terrain. And indeed, the Poplar deposit, the way that was discovered by Utah Copper back in the mid-70s, they walked onto the property and found this outcropping porphyry system. So we knew something interesting was going on there. And we got out there and we were a bit astonished with what we saw, more excited than I've ever been about a porphyry copper project. I've been doing porphyry copper exploration, cut my teeth with Rio Tinto in 2003, 4, 5, living in Chile, in Antofagasta in Chile of all places. So I've been doing porphyry exploration for a long time, and my story's been untouched by success in terms of porphyry exploration, at least until a few weeks ago when we discovered the Thira deposit on our Thira target in the southern Poplar district. So we've done a huge amount of work. We raised some capital there a couple of months ago. We raised 5.6 million, which was good, and the market was still pretty tough there at that time. So we're happy. Of course, we put lots of capital ourselves into it. I put $800,000 into that financing. I've now put $2.4 million into the company myself. My partner's at a similar level. So we put a lot of money to work. And the reason we've been doing that is, firstly, to remind everyone, we've got a huge resource base there at both our Woodjam and Poplar projects. We've got nearly 4 billion pounds of copper and 1.8 million ounces of gold thereabouts in resource base as well. More than underpins the value of the company at the moment. And certainly, as you see copper prices take off, as we've seen, that's going to float all boats, particularly those with big resources, which we have. But gee, we've got some of the best exploration targets I've seen in terms of porphyry exploration in a long time. And that started to pay off, Antonio. We put out a news release there 2 weeks ago. We drilled 500 metres at 0.39% copper from surface, very important, from surface. And then within that, there was 345 metres at 0.43% copper. So we've made a discovery. The market's really only just waking up to that fact. We're about 8 holes into a 10-hole drill campaign. And in fact, what we did there when we hit that, the first couple of holes, we were so impressed that we took budget. We canned our plans to go back to Woodjam for the coming months and took that budget and put it onto the Thira target because it was, what we hit there. Hitting 500 metres of that sort of mineralisation from surface is pretty special in this location. So we took that budget and assigned it to this target to continue drilling that out, and that's what we've been doing. So there's, we've put out the results of a couple of drill holes so far. The program's for 10 holes, about 5,000 metres. So, a huge amount of news flow coming over the next couple of months as we sort of get back, everyone gets their feet under their desk post-summer, and the Beaver Creek conference kicks off, the working back half of the year. So lots going on. We've been very, very busy, and we're excited with what we see at our Thira target, Antonio.
Loads to touch upon there, and we will definitely talk about that new discovery and a couple of specifics there. How much money do you have left right now, though, or how much money are you going to have left at the end of that 5,000 meter drill program?
Look, we've got 3.3 million in the bank. We're coming close to the end of the program. So we'll sort of go into the back half of the year with about 3 million in the bank. So we're in really good shape. Don't need to raise money before year end. Although that said, this discovery warrants a lot more drilling. I think, the next step is to get onto, resource drill out. So, demand for capital will be out there at some point when we need now to sit down. We'll finish this campaign shortly. We'll then sit back and look at all of the data we've got. One of the things that's been very apparent is that, the alteration zone that sits around this porphyry centre is massive. If people go to our website, vizslacopper.com, and look at, I think it's slide 9 of the presentation that's up at the moment, you can see an enormous mag anomaly at the southern part of the property. We've drilled a target at the centre of that. That mag anomaly is about 10 kilometres long by 4 kilometres north-south, 10 kilometres east-west, 4 kilometres north-south. We've drilled one part of that, one target on that, and, I think that this is looking, and, there's going to be a lot of forward-looking statements in what I say here, but we haven't really found the edge of the mineralisation yet. So I think this is a beast. We know we're in a big terrain, a terrain that hosts, giant-sized porphyry systems. Just down the road from us, Surge Copper, where I was a major shareholder, has Berg and Berget. That's 1 billion tonnes at about 0.4% copper equivalent. We know there are beasts in this terrain, in this geological terrain, this district or camp, and I think we're onto one here. So it's going to demand a lot more drilling, but at the moment we've got plenty of cash. And, we're not at risk of running out of cash because, now that we've made this discovery, my partners and I will be writing big checks to support this drill program going forward. And, we love what we see here. It's rare that you get this excited about a project. The market's excited as well.
It sure is. I mean, I think a share price is tripled or something like that since we last spoke. When do you foresee having to raise capital then in that case, though? Is it something for this year? Is it something for next year? How do you see it?
I think we've got enough money to go and continue another campaign. So I would say back end of this year. Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, one of the beauties of this area is that not only does it, it's close to that highway, the major highway that runs north-south through British Columbia. We're 40 kilometres off the highway, but there's a major road that runs down to the Huckleberry mine, which is owned by Imperial Metals. So Imperial's Huckleberry's just down the road, and it's got grid power across it. It's undulating to flat terrain. It's heavily logged. It was burnt out by fire 5 or 6 years ago. So access is super easy. We can drill year round. And I think we're getting to a point where we'll want to do that. So that's sort of, we've been talking about the importance of that for a couple of years now. We've now got a reason to, capitalise on the fact that we can operate year round there, and that's what we'll do.
That's interesting because I did have a question about that as well. I mean, that's oftentimes the counterpoint to BC stories is that they go silent for half the year, right? Which essentially you don't have to in this case. You do have some warrants that are in the money, if I'm not mistaken. Could that reasonably be expected to be a source of capital as well?
Mate, that's a really good point. And I would say absolutely. I'm personally a big warrant holder there. To be honest, it didn't catch us off guard. We knew that this was going to be a porphyry system, I suppose, given that you had, and to back up a little bit in terms of the geology, you had what we saw on the ground. You saw potassic propylitic alteration surrounding an argillic halo, classic quartz sericite pyrite QSP, as we call it, alteration around that massive anomaly. So we knew that it had to be a porphyry system. It was just a matter of finding the centre of it, and we did that with the first drill hole. So we're sort of not scrambling. We've got an excellent technical team, but we've been, doing a lot of technical work, but we haven't thought too much about the corporate stuff. And that's an outstanding point. We've got a lot of warrants there now that are in the money. And I think, I'll be looking to convert mine over the coming months. And that, hopefully triggers a slew of other people. I think there's a bit of time to run on those warrants, but over the next year, we should see that money come in, and it's not insubstantial. It's, I don't know the exact number, but it's several millions of dollars that should come in from those warrants. So it's an outstanding point.
Yeah, there's warrants at different levels essentially is what you have here, but you do have I believe 160 million plus warrants, which is also something that I want to talk about because I'm thinking, the number of the shares outstanding when you add the warrants and everything to it, and you go to fully diluted, you're going over 530 million shares. Is that number worrying you? I mean, being an Aussie, I suppose culturally it doesn't. But are you thinking of a rollback here?
Look, I've learnt not to argue with Canada about that. It is an issue that hangs over people's heads. I at some point we may do a rollback, but we continue to look at acquisitions as well. One of the things that's happened here at Inventor Capital and with Vizsla Silver and what we're doing there, we're in the middle of building what will be the fourth biggest silver mine in Mexico. Simon Smirlek, a director of Vizsla Copper, and COO of Vizsla Silver, he's a partner at Inventor Capital, has come on board and built up a world-class development team here that'll be building our Panuco silver project. We're going to want to deploy those guys to other projects that we can develop over the next 5 to 10 years as well, once they're finished building Panuco. Although having said that, Panuco, I think we're going to be building silver projects down in Mexico for many years to come. But we'd love to keep that field team on the field. And we are looking at acquisitions of other projects that would allow us to rapidly advance into production while we do the drill out and look at studies on things like Thira and the Wood Jam project. So, we're mindful that there may be a corporate opportunity come up at some point in the next 6 months that sees us do an M&A transaction that allows us to do a neat rollback at that point in time. But at the moment, I'm not worried. Your market cap's what you look at, and you simply multiply the share price by the number of shares outstanding to get that. And don't get lost in the weeds on shares out type of thing. If you look at NextGen, I was a co-founder of NextGen, still a happy shareholder. NextGen's got about 600 million shares out and a $6 billion market cap, so it doesn't matter too much, but it does in the minds of the market here, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it does. You bring up an interesting point there, though, with the M&A. Do you see yourself being on? Is it more leaning toward M or more leaning toward A? Like, will you be the acquirer or the acquiree? What are you hinting at there?
Look, we'd like to acquire a project that we can bring into production quickly. We're one of the rare groups, I think, in Canada and particularly in British Columbia that has development capability.
Hmm.
And you can see, you can really set yourself apart from the market. So many juniors here, have a for sale sign on their head all the time. And it's, I if you've got development capability, you should never do that. Particularly if you've got a project that you want to see brought into production that you think merits it. And we have the capacity to do that. So, we're looking around for those sorts of opportunities, things that, the market doesn't love or has forgotten about, that, caught in the trough of the Lassonde curve, as we call it, and acquiring those. And you can see the success that some people have doing that. Panuco itself was essentially that. There's been 450 years of mining there, no modern development study or development work. So by acquiring that project, we managed to take the company from, Vizsla Silver when we started had, I think, a $2 million market capitalisation. Well, it's $2 billion today. So and then Stephen Deans is another good example. Stephen, of course, acquired the Blackwater project, which is not far away from our Thira discovery, and in a similar terrain. Stephen acquired that for a few $100 million, and then now it's a $6 billion company 4 years later. So by stepping in and buying those projects that people don't want to develop or don't have the capability of developing themselves is an incredible opportunity. And here in Canada, there's a lot of opportunities like that. So we see potential to do that. I'd love to see us flesh out what we've got at Thira, get a more realistic valuation on the company north of $100 million, and then be very selective. And we've been doing that for years. We've over the past 4 years kicked the tires on over 500 copper projects around the world, particularly here in Canada and North America. And we know there's some opportunities out there, so we'd love to be the acquirer at the right point in time, and assuming, we're good stewards of shareholder capital. We would only do it where we see fit and where it's very, very accretive to shareholders.
There's plenty of that in BC itself as well. If I'm getting it correctly as to what you're talking about here.
Yeah, look, there are, and across Canada generally, I think, some really good looking projects. There's been a lot of shareholder value created over the last 6 months in BC and the Yukon particularly, but I think. Yeah, and that's another thing that's worth touching on, I suppose, is that our strategy, we pivoted really last year. We've got this very high grade zone at Deerhorn on the Woodjam property. We put out some outstanding results in 110 metres at 1.2% copper equivalent, those sorts of numbers. Really good results that if you put those out today, I think, you'd see your share price respond fairly explosively. Back then, I think, we put out some results in time for Beaver Creek at that sort of level, 110 metres at 1.2% copper. People treated that as a liquidity event and the share price sold off. So that was frustrating. I stepped into the market and bought a lot of stock personally on the market at that point in time. But over the last 6 months, and I think the big one, and we put this in our slide deck as a bit of a guide to investors, but back in January, AMARC put out really good results, 200 metres at plus 2% copper equivalent from their project up in the Toodoggone. that's a JV with Freeport, and their share price went from, I think, 15 cents to 70, 80, 90 cents. And then next door, and this is something that is really interesting, is that you're now starting to see nearology plays, companies with ground nearby discoveries that have performed well. And TDG has the ground right next door to that A-Mark discovery. Their share price went from 10 cents to 50 cents. It's now about 60 cents, while Coles, Skeena and I did a deal to vend one of our other copper projects in the province into that company. We're now major shareholders of TDG. So that's sort of indicated, the market's starting to really reward discoveries. They're keeping their eye on discoveries. So we pivoted our focus from resource drill out and high grade resource drill out at Wood Jam to really focusing on the exploration targets we've got. And that's exciting. I suppose, Thira's the first cab off the rank. We've made a discovery there. Lots of news flow to come as we drill that out. We'll do less at Wood Jam this year, but we've also got our CopperView target. So, Antonio, we want to get down there and test that target this year as well, because that has all the hallmarks of presenting a potential major discovery as well. So we've pivoted from resource drill out focus to discovery focus as the market's sort of rewarding discovery again.
I'm just writing it down because I also have questions about CopperView. But talk to me just before that. Talk to me a little bit more about that fully diluted paper, though, here, because while it seems like the market is, again, well receptive of your new discovery, which we'll touch upon more, but you'll still need kind of strong upward forces to push through that overhang of those 160 million warrants, right? So, again, a rollback might not be the strategy here right now, unless an M&A, as you told me. But you also have, again, a free trading date coming up in the latter part of September in the back of that May financing. So how do you keep the current momentum in the stock going? Will it take an extra discovery at CopperView, or how do you see the whole setup here?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question because you're talking about sort of market dynamics, and I suppose one of the things, in terms of who's been in and out of the stock, who's trading. Obviously we've been writing big checks ourselves to support the financings. We did two major deals. I think we've done over 20 deals to consolidate ground in the areas that we've got, mostly at Wood Jam. But the two major deals was acquire Wood Jam Copper for about $11 million in stock. And then we acquired Poplar through the acquisition of Universal Copper in March last year. The Wood Jam shareholders, I think we issued somewhere in the order of 130 million shares to make that acquisition. And then Universal Copper, we issued 83 million shares from memory. Don't quote me on that, but it was about that level to Universal Copper shareholders. I think to a lesser extent, Wood Jam had a bit of a cult following. Bill Morton and his team are outstanding explorers, fantastic guys. But, there are a lot of people who'd been in that story for, more than 10 years, some of them 20, 25 years, and really didn't have the liquidity to get out. So some of those shareholders treated our acquisition and the volume that we were buying ourselves and we generated in the market to take that opportunity to get out of the stock, but not to a major extent. However, the Universal Copper shareholders, they've been in there for 10 plus years and really saw no way to exit. And unfortunately, a lot of those $80 million were 80 million shares came back out and hit us in the face hard. And I'll tell you, I'd be very reticent to ever do, particularly in a down market, another stock-based or script-based acquisition, because we saw a lot of that stock come out and, the news flow we were creating whilst it was outstanding, the exploration work the team was doing. We had some really bloody good hits from Wood Jam last summer. Unfortunately, those sort of long-suffering shareholders treated it as an opportunity to exit. And so they sold into a lot of that liquidity that our good work had created. I recognise that, and the bulk of my money personally I've put in through placements because I like to see money go into drill holes. rather than, returning to shareholders who want to sell. But come Beaver Creek last year, it just became too much of an opportunity. I think I bought 700,000 shares at about 5 cents there at one point in September last year. So you're up against some market dynamic challenges. But what I noticed, and one of the reasons our share price has started to move up again, despite the equity issuances, the raises we've done over the last 18 months, is that I think we've cleaned up the register a lot. So a lot of that, the issued and outstanding shares and warrants are owned by people who are involved or watching the story closely. So the register sort of, despite having that many shares out, it's in good hands now. So there's been probably 18 months, 2 years of just cleaning up the register and resetting the base, if you like. Mm-hmm. And that's happened now. You're starting to see the share price respond very, very solidly to good news. So that's a good sign.
Do you think you're going to have any news between now and then? So call it a month and 10 days from now. What kind of news do you expect in the meantime that could, again, push you into that next leg up or at least help you keep the momentum?
Oh, yeah. A lot of news to come. We've had that rig turning out there since we made the discovery about a month ago. We had to wait for assays. We rushed assays on the first couple of holes, then had to wait a few weeks for those assays to come back. But since that time, we've drilled another 7 drill holes of 7 in total, or 8 in total as of today, with a couple to come. So. And what we're seeing, I suppose, is we should finish this program in the next week. Assays. There's a lot of good geology out here in British Columbia at the moment. You're seeing, and generally in North America. So demand on lab space and time is pretty high at the moment. So assays are taking sort of 4 to 6 weeks to come back to us. We've submitted a couple of more holes. And I can tell you, happy to say that we haven't found the edge of this system. There's, the rocks look right. The core I've seen, I was up there a couple of weeks ago. I rushed up to check out some things. And certainly we're seeing some good core come out of the ground. And I think, the news flow over the next couple of months as we get those assays back will be very, very strong. So, look out for sort of probably 2 releases of drill assays over the next 6 weeks. Certainly, like everyone, we like to have something nice out for Beaver Creek. So we'll be working hard to get those assays back in time for that and get something out to the market well ahead of that.
Well, let's talk about that, actually, what you've seen in drilling so far. So Thira or Thira with 345 meters of 0.4 copper equivalent. That's at the Poplar project again. So the number of moving parts for the story as a whole actually seems to have grown as well. So I assume this is becoming your focus right now. Again, you've upsized your drilling. But how does everything stack up right now? Like last time when we spoke, you put it as Megaton, Poplar South, and then CopperView in terms of what your favorite targets were. Is that now flipped? Like, did you like Poplar South more than Megaton and then CopperView? Or like, who's your favorite child?
That's a great one. Look, Thira was always my favourite in the sense that it's the most textbook porphyry target that I've seen in 25 years of doing this. You've got all roads point to that anomaly that we've just drilled, in the sense that you're in a district, you're in a terrain that hosts porphyry systems. There's one on our property already that's been drilled out. You've got big systems to the south at Huckleberry, Burgett, Noosa. So we know we're in the right terrain. You've got this very big mag anomaly. When we drove down there in May last year, the first thing we saw was just a shallow sort of borrow pit that had hit copper mineralisation. And a lot of copper oxide at surface. So that was a fair indication. And then we started walking around the hills there and mapping it out, and you saw zonation from propylitic alteration all the way into QSP alteration towards the centre of this big anomaly. And then we did IP across it. There's a big chargeability anomaly. You've got a classic mag donut. magnetite destruction at the centre of porphyry systems is a common thing that you see. So you end up with a mag donut shape anomaly. Then we did soil geochemistry across the centre of this big anomaly, and what we, and we found a classic copper high at the centre of the anomaly with a zinc halo around it. There was a lot to suggest there was a porphyry system there. But what we do know about it now, I think, is that the porphyry that we're drilling out at the moment doesn't have the scale to give that big it's about 10 kilometres east-west by 4 kilometres north-south. I don't think that the porphyry system that's there has that size that should give that large an anomaly. And of course, porphyries occur in clusters. So our suspicion is that there's another porphyry centre or two hiding under that big mag anomaly and all of that QSP and propylitic alteration. So that's the other thing we've got to do. So one of the things that we'll do next, when I say we're going to sit back and look at what we've got, we're not going to sit back and look at what we've got. We're just going to get back to work and do, more IP over the whole area, and soil geochem across that whole anomaly so that we can see if there's potential, if there are targets for another porphyry centre or two under that anomaly and in that Thira zone. So, that sort of sums it up, I think. There's, I think, very good chance of finding another porphyry system there as well.
What are your, I suppose, goals or dreams, aspirations for this target as a whole, though? Like how big could it get, or how big does it have to get in order to work in this, again, in this context?
Yeah, look, we've sort of stepped out there. I think that the furthest we've stepped out to the east is about 800 metres to date, by 400 metres. We've seen the same rocks. We'll look out for a news release on this in the next week or two. We want to wait to get assays back, but we haven't closed off the system yet, I think. So I think and one of the things we haven't done, I suppose we're caught a little bit off guard at the depth. People talk about porphyry copper preservation. Porphyry systems are typically sort of, a lot of porphyries that are drilled around the world are eroded. And so you're looking at a depth slice through the volcano that was the porphyry system, or the porphyry apophyses, as we say. So you've got this magma chamber that comes up. You get hydrothermal fluid coming out of the top of it that gets punched up into the surrounding country rock, gets unroofed and exposes a porphyry system. And you've got all those alteration zones around that due to the different natures of the fluids that are circulating in that system over time. But often they're eroded off because, of course, these are superficial phenomena. If you go to Chile, you can see a modern-day porphyry system being developed as we speak on the edge of a volcano, and then they pop off, and that's what gives you that porphyritic rock that's classically associated with it. Well, you see, because they sit at the surface, you don't see too many old porphyry systems around the world. You can go to the Pilbara where the land surface is actually 400 million years old, and you can see porphyries there that are 2 billion years old. But for the most part, the biggest porphyry systems live in that ring of fire around the Pacific Basin, and Chile, all the way up to Alaska. The typical age of those porphyries varies between sort of 200 million years. Best event was the sort of Eocene Oligocene event in the 70 to 80 million years ago. That's what we're looking at here and dealing with here. But, you look at Chuquicamata, Escondida, these were all Eocene Oligocene porphyries 70 million years ago formed. They've eroded significantly. Then you've got the Miocene event in Chile, which was about 10 million years ago, testing my memory here. 10 million years ago. So they haven't had much time to erode off. Well, here, that's what we're sort of looking at. You've sort of, I think you've seen erosion of some of the lithocap, as they say, and you're seeing exposure of a depth slice of that porphyry system. It's a long way of saying we haven't found the bottom of it, Antonio. We've drilled 500 metres deep. Each of those holes has ended in mineralisation. We're drilling one hole, I think, to 800 metres deep as we speak, just to see what's at depth there. But that will add serious tonnes as well. Of course, your strip ratio can get higher as you get deeper in the system. But here, the porphyry system itself outcrops the mineralisation is just below a few metres of rubble at the surface. And we may well have an 800 metre deep system. So if you look at that, if we're still hitting sort of 800 metres out by 400 metres by 5 to 800 metre depth size, you end up with a lot of tonnage. And we know down there at Berg and Berget that there's a billion tonnes there. You know, could we have something like that? Potentially, I think. You know, I'd bet my bottom dollar that this will be bigger than 500 million tonnes, but let's see. You know, the next few releases will give us a hint as to that. It's too early to say. And then if you have another, like we've already got sort of 350 million tonnes at these sorts of grades up there at Poplar itself, which is, you know, only 15 kilometres to the north of us. And then you've got these other targets that we're developing along that bigger mag anomaly that is the Thira target that's 10 kilometres long that we think could be other porphyry systems. Interestingly enough, in terms of that, you know, geology, rheology, one of the drill holes on the eastern side that we're waiting on assays from hit some classic epithermal textures, you know, low pressure epithermal textures, which suggest that you're quite high in the system. So you've got a lot of preserved porphyry there. You know, one of these other porphyries that may or may not exist in this area could be a fully preserved porphyry column, which is interesting geologically, but also very interesting in terms of the tons it could generate. So I think we're onto something pretty big. And, you know, that's reflected when we put out that drill result. We were a bit astonished with the interest from, you know, various other corporates, including a lot of the majors who immediately got in touch and wanted to know more about it. And I think part of their thinking and our thinking as well is that there's no better place in BC to develop a project because it is so well located, 40 kilometres south of that major highway and the rail line. It's got the haul road, that major road that runs to the Huckleberry mine, which is in care and maintenance and owned by Imperial. You know, we're only 20 kilometres to the south, to the north of Huckleberry as well. You know, I would imagine that they wouldn't mind having some mill feed so that they can turn that project back on. And, you know, Surge Copper's Berg and Berget are largely useless to them because it's so hard to access, whereas we're on their haul road down to the Huckleberry mine. We've got grid power going across the property, and it's really flat undulating terrain that's easy to operate in year round and easy to explore. So it's, you know, if the project has the scale that we suspect it might, then, you know, this could be very much of interest to any one of the majors who wants you know, a new large project to get on with and bring into production.
Well, but what is large in that case? Like, how big does it have to be in order for it to be of interest to one of the majors?
Yeah, look, it's an excellent question. I think, you know, mid-tier copper producer probably wants a project that can deliver 50 to 80,000 tonnes of copper product per annum. A major's going to need, you know, 152 to 300 million tonnes of copper production per annum. 300,000 tonnes of copper production. What am I saying? So where does that put us? Like, okay, so if you've got for argument's sake, and this is not talking about our project, but 1 billion tonnes at 0.4% copper, what's that? 4 million tonnes of copper. Assuming that you get a 70%, sort of a bit of a heuristic there, rule of thumb, 70% conversion of resources to reserves. That gives you 3 million tonnes of copper. That's big enough to build a 250,000 tonne per annum copper mine on. That's big enough for most of the majors. Maybe not Rio Tinto and BHP, but certainly a Freeport or the like would be interested in a project of that scale. So, you know, 1 billion tonnes for them, probably half that for one of the sort of mid-tier producers and even perhaps a Freeport. You know, 500 million tonnes at those sorts of grades is nothing to be sneezed at, and is a good, you know, a good amount of copper to build a major project on.
Where's this, the discovery hole, where does it fall on the package, specifically, again, from the perspective of topography and accessibility? I know you touched upon it, but just kind of trying to imagine how it is, like it may be relative to, as you said, Berg and Berget. How's the topography where the discovery happened?
Yeah, I'll ask the team to put some photos on the website and on the latest slide deck. But if you look at Again, VizslaCopper.com. Slide 12 shows the satellite image of the area. It's you can see it's very, very sort of undulating terrain. It's farmland. A lot of cows getting around there, uh, and so it's sort of super easy access. Big fire went through there in 2017, and that made access super easy. But most of the property's been logged, in this southern area. So it's sort of gentle, undulating terrain, super easy to access. I've spent a few days walking around the hills there. You can drive pretty much anywhere, and anywhere that you can't drive is a 10-minute walk away. If you go south, there's a range that comes in. The haul road between us across the property and down to Imperial's Huckleberry mine stays on that general terrain, but there's a big finger of a mountain range that gets you up into the Alpine, and that's where Berg and Burgett sit. So for those guys to transport around to Imperial Huckleberry mine, they've got to come out of the Alpine, around the range and back around. So whilst as the crow flies, their deposits are closer to that Huckleberry mine by road and by ease of access. Ours are much better positioned and much closer.
Where are these next holes then going to be? Because I'm looking at the map right here. So if you look at the Poplar package, the Thira target is kind of in the south of it, kind of in the center of it, but in the south, and then specifically the discovery hole. So 138 is more on the left-hand side, but kind of in the middle of that anomaly as well. Where are you drilling now relative to that anomaly?
So what we've done is a couple of step outs from, so you're right, that TH25 138, the discovery holes on the western margin of the chargeability anomaly. We then stepped out 200 metres to the east towards the centre of that anomaly, and then another 200 metres further out and further east. We've then angled holes out from there to head further east still. Those, we're still in the same rocks. This classic sort of very intensely stockwork potassic. I think if you go to the next slide 15, you can see what they look like. Classic, really good, classic, beautiful porphyry textures. A lot of stockworking, a lot of veins, several different stages or types of veins, A, B, and C type veins, sutured veins, moly-rich veins, chalcopyrite-rich veins, a lot of disseminated chalcopyrite, all in a intensely potassically altered country rock or porphyry rock. We're seeing that all the way out to the east as well. So I think, we're waiting on assays eagerly as we speak. But I think it's looking pretty good. And then in terms of north-south, we've really only stepped, 200 metres either side of that discovery hole and angling holes away from the discovery hole to further test the scale extent of this anomaly.
Are you thinking assaying announcing the assays to the market hole by hole, or do you want to batch them?
No, I think we want to batch them. Is a better way of doing it. Drill progress has been very, very quick. We've been impressed with the drilling company, and that's another point here. Whenever I talk about targeting in this business, I talk about size of price, cost of test, chance of success. Well, the cost of test here is as low as I've ever seen for diamond drilling. I think we're just below $300 a metre all in, including camp, staff, assay costs. That's very, very cheap, just given the ease of access and the quality of the rock, to be honest. It's been I think, pretty straightforward for the guys to drill through this porphyry.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm thinking about how you're going to be assaying them again, because essentially you're going to have drilled through that whole anomaly, right? Because on the left hand side, then you're going to drill essentially in the middle, and then on the right hand side, it's going to start giving you an idea of size, maybe as well. I think. So,
yeah, absolutely. You'll be able to, within a few weeks, I think you'll be able to run some back of envelope numbers that'll give you an indication of what the resource tonnage potential might be.
Mm. How's that drilling been going from the cost perspective? Is it as you expected, or what's happening there?
Yeah, no, really, given ease of access, availability of drill rigs in this area, very, very pleasantly surprised. Yeah, I think we'd be right around $300 a metre, which, I think if you're drilling in the Toodoggone, for example, where AMARC's got its discovery, you need to move rigs around with helicopters. A lot of the guys up there, you're talking about 700 metres at $700, $600 or $700 per metre, all in that neck of the woods. Here we're under half that, so it's an ideal place to spend shareholder funds on a discovery.
Yeah. Poplar is not the only project you're exploring this year, though. You're doing some mapping, geochem, and some geophysics and CopperView, if I'm not mistaken. What's give me an update on that. And is it looking like you'll drill it this year, or does that depend on further results from Thira as well?
Yeah, well, you asked that question before about which of the our babies here are our favourites, and I think Thira's always been mine just because it is this perfect textbook target. I do like, Megaton. We announced the discovery there 2 years ago on wood jam called Megaton. We drilled 110 metres at 0.2% copper there, Antonio, and I think, we're on the edge of something big. I do want to get back to that this year, but I don't know that we'll have the budget to do it. We could well be sitting on the edge of another southeast deposit. So, it's food for thought to get back there. And we've got this Great Plains anomaly on the wood jam property, which is a big IP chargeability high that I think we've got to do a bit more work on. But, the good thing about wood jam is that we know we're in a porphyry terrain there. And that there are, the conversion rate of target to discoveries, but nothing short of phenomenal. I think, Bill Morton and the crew came up with about 7 targets and made 5 porphyry discoveries. The first one we came up with ourselves resulted in a porphyry discovery. So it's worth the effort to get back in there, and we want to do that. But we've just had these 2 other screaming priorities that are too, you constantly, good geologists are constantly ranking and prioritising their targets. Thira came out at number 1, but CopperView I do want to see drilled this year. If people go to slide 21, 22, 23 of our deck there, the CopperView project, we acquired that 18 months ago, 2 years ago. Steve was out in the field hunting and found copper stained rocks where he was hunting, and realised he was only a few kilometres north of Kodiak's gate zone, where they drilled, going back a couple of years ago, they drilled 535 metres at 0.5 copper and 0.3 grams per tonne gold from about 170 metres. That had us intrigued. We were astonished that it was available to us. We assumed that Kodiak would have done a deal on that ground. Anyway, we did a very cheap deal. I think we paid the fella $500,000 in stock. And the reason we did that and we were thrilled with it is that there's a big mag lineament that trends north-south through Kodiak's ground, through their man zone, through their gate zone, which is only 5 kilometres north of our target, and where their deposits occur on these magnetic breaks in that mag lineament north to south. And we noticed when we got the mag back over our property, there's a prominent break in that lineament on the property only 5 kilometres north of gate zone, remembering that porphyries occur in clusters. We then did IP over it. We put out those results about a couple of months ago, and the IP results were astounding. There's a very, very prominent, strong chargeability anomaly. We're just waiting on getting soil G-Chem back. But if copper lights up like we suspect it will there, then that's something that we absolutely must drill this year. We're waiting on drill permits now. I think we'll have those back for September, and we'll be able to get out there and hit that target. And I think that's, I've prioritised. I think Steve's of the same view as me, that chargeability anomaly. If you look at the next slide on our deck there, slide 24. This, stands out like the proverbial, astonishing very strong chargeability anomaly of the tenor associated with sulfides sitting along the major structure that seems to control the emplacement of porphyry systems, including a major porphyry that's just to the south of us, 5 kilometres south of us. Rare that you see a better target. So that sort of screams to me that that needs to be tested. So that's what we'd like to get in and do later this year. And, you know, hopefully when we speak next, maybe not at Beaver Creek, we won't be ready for that on this one, but, you know, later in the year, I'd hope that we'll be talking to you about being one of the only or very few juniors that's got 2 major discoveries on the go in 1 year at once.
Yeah. When do you want to do it then? In that case, I mean, because you said year round is doable. Will prices for drilling go up a little bit toward the winter, or how do you see that?
No, look, yeah, that's a great question. You know, potentially prices for drilling will go up because there's so much good work going on. You know, a lot of money's been raised. There's a lot of, you know, Peter Brown's a good mate of mine, and we have lunch fairly regularly, and we're both of the same view at the moment that it's pretty rare that you get a time like this where you've got a market and there's such good geology. There's a lot of, you know, before we came on, we were talking about Rackler and a few other things like that. Of course, Vizsla Silver's got some outstanding discoveries, TDG, AMARC, a lot of good projects. Gladiator, one of my favourites, you know, being drilled out as we speak. So demand for rigs is pretty high. The worst thing is demand for lab space is very high, and that's probably our biggest challenge at the moment is getting quick turnaround on on assays.
Well, I also see that you're going to be using some AI for some of that exploration work. Is that part of the mix here, or because I saw that news release? So yeah, walk me through it. What's that, or maybe talking about the why in that decision as well, as terms of cost benefit analysis. What are you hoping? What are you hoping the computer is going to do for you?
Yeah, look, well, some of your listeners might be familiar with the story of ISO Energy and how I started that company and we discovered the Hurricane deposit. We used an early sort of form of AI in the mining business, piggybacking off Microsoft's Watson technology to look at clay geochemistry. So we'd done some very early stage work 10 years ago using AI to look at, correlations between clay geochemistry and uranium mineralization. Steve De Jong at Verify and Verify AI, a friend of mine, sort of suggested we should really give it a look at that, and came up with basically doing it for free to demonstrate his capability. And I suppose, Steve and I being a bit sort of grey-haired and sceptical on these things, we were the younger team, a bit more dynamic and a bit more interested in it. We did that work and we were impressed. It really highlighted the targets that we liked, but also came up with a couple of other targets that we possibly missed in our scrape of the data. So that was enough to warrant continuing on with that work and seeing what it comes up with. So, yeah, we've been pleasantly surprised, impressed with how that's looking. And, I think we'll continue to do that. Even Steve was impressed, and he's pretty hard to impress.
I've spoken to Steve, and they're doing interesting things. I think this year is going to be big for them as well, just to see sort of a proof of concept, if you will, to see how everything's working out. I wanted to talk to you about marketing, or get an update on what you're doing for marketing. I see that you've signed a 6-month contract with one Machai Capital. Not cheap for 6 months, some 300,000 Canadian plus tax on top of that. What are they doing for you? How are you finding the performance so far?
Yeah, look, one of the things you must do in this business, particularly in a downturn like we've been through, is that, no one's going to buy the stock if they don't know about the story. So we've done some European marketing, trying to bring people up to speed with what we've got there. Been a lot of boots on the ground. I suppose I've done a lot of interviews. I'm about to run to Haywoods here in 15 minutes to give a desk presentation to the brokers there at Haywoods. So we've been doing a lot of sort of organic stuff that you just generally do, or I do anyway. Yeah, we thought we'd sort of test out Machai. We've been impressed with how that's gone in Europe. You've seen a lot of buying in Germany over the past couple of months. That's another thing that's interesting, I think, is that, brokers around here are a little bit cynical. And when you say that you're going to spend money on marketing, they'll buy your stock. When for the last few years, you say that you're going to drill, ho hum, but you say you're going to spend money on marketing and they'll get in and buy the stock because they know that that's been the only thing that's working. Well, that's flipped now. You put out good drill results, you make a discovery, people buy your stock, but they'll only buy your stock if you know about it. So you do have to run a good marketing campaign. We do a lot of road shows. I've been on the road constantly and talking to investors constantly over the last few months, well, the last few years, to be honest. But a lot of that's fallen on deaf ears. But I'm very pleased to report that our promotion and marketing efforts are starting to be rewarded now, and you're starting to see people come into the stock in a big way.
Yeah. Well, it has been interesting to see that. And, sometimes you wonder, how do you even measure the effectiveness of marketing, and is it good or is it not? Besides that, marketing, Craig, I know you almost have to go here, so I'm kind of running through some of these questions that I've got on my list. Any other material changes to the way you spend money, or how much of it you're going to spend in terms of G&A is what I'm thinking here?
Yeah, not really. That G&A is still sort of 1.5 million a year. That includes a lot of the salaries for the team. We do have, we've renegotiated a number of our agreements to convert cash payments to stock payments. That's been helpful. I think we have a larger sort of $500,000 payment to the underlying owner of the Poplar property by the back end of this year. But, you're always hopeful that he'll take that in stock because cash has been the hardest thing to come by. But I think that's about to change, a lot more money coming into the sector. The other thing, mate, I should touch on is just how hot BC's become. You've seen huge investments from Fortescue, Freeport, Teck continue to invest more, Boliden, interestingly enough, African Rainbow coming into Surge Copper. All of a sudden it's heated up. People are catching on to the opportunity, and I think it doesn't hurt that we've got this major new discovery to help alert people to what's in their own backyard,
Well, it's interesting to think about how BC is developing and everything in between. Since we last spoke, Craig, what's the most fair criticism of Vizsla Copper that you've heard?
I don't know. I think a lot of people were probably a bit disappointed that we raised money, down where we did. But, I make no apologies for that. This is a capital intensive industry. And if you don't want to get diluted, write checks like I do. And that's, you can't. We've been very clear with investors that we're going to continue to explore and continue to drill out these things. And I'm glad we have, because we've made a discovery. A lot of people probably didn't want us to do that Poplar deal, but look at it now, So that's probably the thing. And, share price count does weigh on people, but it doesn't worry me too much. That'll get fixed up in due course.
What else is on your mind? What keeps you up at night when you start thinking about Vizsla Copper?
Oh, what was keeping me up last night? You're always a little bit worried that capital won't be available to you, but we don't seem to have had any problems. I think we do a good job for shareholders, and we spend their funds wisely. There's been good, strong interest from potential, strategic partners in this. So there's a lot of thinking going on in the background there. The other thing, buddy Trump mucking around with the copper and gold markets and with his silly comments, I think all that's done is highlight the fact that, there's not enough copper in the world. I do think that we're heading into a situation now where, you've got copper inventories that are so low, and you see a little swing change, like Trump hints that he's going to put tariffs on copper. You see copper price spike $1 to $5.80, and the highest it's ever been. I think we're going to see more of that over the next couple of years. Copper's a good place to be. Silver's a good place to be. Moly, gold, and uranium. I think we're heading into the biggest bull market we've ever seen. 10 years of very high prices, including $30 per pound copper. Doesn't keep me up at night. It makes me sleep well.
I really hope you're right in that one. And it does seem like we're going to have more conversations, hopefully more often in the next couple of months, because you're going to have more results in the meantime. So I'll let you go here. But what am I forgetting to ask you? Anything else that you wanted to talk about that I've failed to bring up?
No, look at I think that sort of covers everything. Look out for, really good, strong news flow over the next month or two. And then we head into that conference season in Beaver Creek. One of the things that's worth pointing out is that Peter Brown tells me August is always traditionally the worst month of the year. Everyone goes on holidays. There's a buyer's strike 8 out of 10 years. We're not in that this year. This is a lead into a major boom over the back end of this year. So anyone who's buying stock now is going to do very well when everyone's back at their desk come September, and you and I will be at Beaver Creek putting the good word out down there.
Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Likewise, mate. It's a real pleasure.
And as always, thanks to everyone for watching Resource Talks. I have a couple of more things to say, though. The fact that this company was interviewed here today does not mean that they're necessarily a good or a bad company. I'm not here to endorse nor attack anyone. I am simply here to ask some questions. If you find that I have failed in asking a question that you would have liked to hear an answer to, which will happen as I'm not an experienced interviewer, please let me know and I will try to correct that mistake in a future interview. As mentioned at the beginning, please understand that mineral exploration and development is an extremely risky business. Losing money is the norm and should be the expectation. This is a very complex sector, and the performance of individual companies typically depends on many different moving particles, including company-specific factors like geology, financing ability, and many others, really, as well as particles that are outside of the company's control, like geopolitics, macroeconomics, commodity prices, and many more, most of which are nearly impossible to fully understand. Moreover, these companies that typically get interviewed on Resource Talks are in the pre-revenue stage, which means they rely on the public markets for the financing of their operations, which could result in shareholder dilution. Furthermore, as a general rule of thumb, you'll be better off understanding that all company communications online, albeit this interview or their website and their presentation and their social media accounts, or even the social media accounts which you thought were your friends and then told you about a stock, everything really that these companies do is intended as marketing. And although I do not make buy or sell recommendations because there is a clear conflict of interest given the nature of my business, many out there do. And you should be aware of that inherent bias and you should be careful out there. That bias is not always going to be clearly disclosed with everyone out there. So it is safer for you anytime you're watching any type of company specific content to approach it with a dose of skepticism and assume that the party telling you about it is biased in at least some shape or form, because there will always be a bias. Again, albeit clear or not. So always ask yourself what the incentive of your counterparty is and never rely on them regardless of their incentives, but instead double check if what they're saying is true, again, by using setterplus.ca. The fact that I have no idea what I'm doing should already be clear to you at this point. I am not saying this to make jokes or laugh with myself. I just simply do not have a long enough track record of consistent investment profits. So I should under no circumstances be considered an authority on anything. Again, although this may sound amusing to you, believe me, it is not amusing and it is not intended as a joke. I'm simply pointing out a fact and warning you not to rely on anything I do or say. Unfortunately, at least to my understanding, nobody out there has any special abilities. The CEOs do not possess any superior knowledge, and they cannot know about what will go up, what will go down, or what will go in circles. Some people even believe that to be rule number one on Wall Street. Nobody really knows. None of us know whether any of the company's activities will result in a success, again, given that we're talking about high-risk activities where most of the times it ends in failure. Also, unfortunately, try as I may, I won't always catch all red flags or all challenges with the companies. So even if I did ask a few tough questions in here, don't rely on this being all of the tough questions. Again, these are complicated startups with many moving parts, and I am conflicted given the nature of this business. Therefore, I cannot guarantee the quality of anything presented in this video, and you cannot hold me responsible for any losses or damages stemming from the way you decide to use this interview. Viewers, listeners, and readers acknowledge and agree that the information presented herein did not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security or investment or to participate in any trading strategy. Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business strictly disclaim any and all liability for losses and or damages, whether direct, indirect, special, or consequential, or other consequences, however so caused, arising out of any use or reproduction of the content published by Resource Talks, or any decision made or action taken in reliance upon it. By consuming this content, all consumers vow to release Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business from all claims, proceedings, or consequences. This is all to say, I know it's a lot of lawyer talk, but this is all to say that you shouldn't blindly trust me or anybody on the internet, and you should do your own research. Once again, social media is meant for entertainment. It is setterplus.ca where you do your research. That's where you'll find a company's official filings, and I encourage you to read and analyze the Management Information Circular, the financial statements, the Management Discussion and Analysis, and whenever available, the NI 43-101 technical documents. If you don't understand everything in those documents, the chances of you losing money are even higher than they normally are in this space. And as mentioned earlier, the chances of even the best analysts in this sector losing money are extremely high, since this is venture capital and it is not for everybody. I'll leave you with one of Charlie Munger's quotes, which I wish I had listened to more often earlier on, which says, quote, "If you don't understand it, don't do it."